What is the truth in the stories we are told? We've been given a story of a world fueled by separation. We've become separate from one another, separate from the earth, ultimately separate from the true nature of ourselves. It's time we learn the truth. It's time you rewrite your story. It's time to realign with who it is that you really are. This is the fifth dimension.
You are infinite and eternal. We are infinite and eternal.
Our natural essence, we could say, is simply being.
We have this awakening coming together as a perfect storm.
We're ready for this. We have the capacity inside. We just got to find that.
And I want to welcome everybody into the Fifth Dimension podcast with me, Evan McDermott. For this episode, I want to deep dive into the concept of good and evil. Now, good and evil is truly the ultimate yin and yang of mankind, right? These are two qualities that exist within all of us. We all have the capacity for good. We all have the capacity for evil. And I feel collectively we have really been disconnected from this truth. We have really been disconnected from the capabilities that exist within ourselves. And there are some serious ramifications of that. And I'm going to deep dive into that and, talk about why that's so important and why it's so important to establish this connection within yourself and recognize both the potential for light and darkness that is within, right? So before we jump into that, if you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, whatever platform you're on. Once we hit 50 ratings on Apple Podcasts, we're going to be doing a little bit of a giveaway. So click that 5-star rating if you're listening on there. I greatly appreciate all the support. You clicking subscribe, how more people are going to find the show. So greatly appreciate that. Also check out my new book, The Story of Interconnectivity, which is now available. It's time to realign with who it is that you really are. The link to that is in the episode description below. Also head on over to evanmcdermott.org and check out some of the coaching programs I got going on, such as the 4-week life purpose transformation. Again, realigning with who it is that you really are, reconnecting with that divine purpose that you're meant to be living. Have a few spots available for that. Excited to work with a few of you. Again, evanmcdermott.org. You can also sign up for my mailing list while you're there. And also connect with us on social media. I love connecting with listeners of the show, particularly on Instagram, at Evan McDermott, or also at the Fifth Dimension Podcast. Come join the community over there. Hopefully we don't get taken down and censored. I just took down Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which is a little discouraging to me. I don't feel too great about that. But, we're just going to keep going with the flow and keep speaking what must be spoke, as I shall say. So let's jump into the nature of good and evil. And as I was saying, this exists within all of us. The ultimate yin and yang, good, evil. There's karma in that. And really, what is good and evil outside of perception? There isn't a universal law that was given to us by nature that defines good and evil. It's all in our perception. You have the left right now, for example, who vilifies Donald Trump and views him as the epitome of Hitler and all that is evil and wrong in the world. When on the right, it's the polar opposite in a lot of senses. He sort of represented the heart and spirit of America for a lot of people. So good and evil, it all comes down to perception. And we need to recognize within ourselves that, we hold judgments. We see different things going on in the world, and we'll want to put a label on that. Is it good? Is it evil? But ultimately, we all have this capacity for being good, for being virtuous, for being moral, right? And we all also have this capacity for evil. We have the capability to do horrendous things. I'm going to dive into that a little bit further later on in the podcast. But I want to start by talking about where this sort of origin of good and evil emerges from and how it plays such a pivotal part in our society, right? If we look at Western civilization, the foundation of Western civilization actually comes from a lot of the morals of it, the virtues of it, what we live by. It comes from the biblical stories. And so I'm going to refer to a couple of those in these podcasts. I myself am not Christian. I myself don't follow one religion. I'm very spiritual in nature. I actually agree with a lot of the truths that are relayed through them. But in particular, I view the Bible as a metaphorical representation of the human condition, a metaphorical representation that we've actually used to define a lot of our pillars of society. I mean, a perfect example of this is the idea that we all have divine worth. I mean, you can see this played out within our legal system, for example, and Jordan Peterson goes into great detail on this on a lot of his lectures and lecture series. And it's this idea that we all have divine worth. I mean, why don't we just go and hang someone in the public square or stone them for the public anymore, as opposed to having this long, drawn-out legal process to ensure guilt or to ensure innocence? And even when you are guilty, that doesn't mean we're going to kill you. You have opportunities for reconciliation, ideally. I know that's not always the case. But, how often do you see somebody who has committed a heinous act turn their life around and become an upstanding citizen and bring such good to the world, right? That person who was doing these horrible things, maybe they killed somebody, maybe they raped somebody, and that doesn't excuse what they did, but they were able to take that darkness, that act that they themselves committed, and the full awareness of that, and knowing that, and they were able to take that and become a better person and ultimately help people later on, right? I mean, it's the perfect example of good and evil within somebody. I mean, again, you could say somebody who's top of the line at society on our hierarchy of moral virtues. I mean, we could talk about like Catholic priests, for example, and the big scandal of sexual assault. You have these virtuous priests who all these people look up to, and then boom, what do you know? They're committing sexual assault. They're these heinous deeds against children, right? Good and evil exists within everybody. But ultimately, the pinnacle of our society, getting back to what I was talking about, the pinnacle of our society is that we are all virtuous. We all have divine worth within us, right? And that's why I feel like when we talk about atheism and nihilism and sort of the direction that Western culture is really going, where we don't integrate this idea that we are all worthy, we are all one, we all have this sort of same aspect of the divine within us, it doesn't work. What happens when you pull that from underneath the rug of civilization? You get the Stalins, you get the Hitlers, you get the quote-unquote deplorable label, people who are undesirable. We need to recognize that we all have divine worth, even those who we may disagree with, even those who we may, in our eyes, view as evil. There is something within them that is divine, that is loving, if we can bring that out. And that is the perspective we need to embody, but also the perspective we need to recognize within ourselves. I mean, do you recognize your own divine worth? Do you recognize what it is within you that is divine and that is virtuous and good? But also, do you recognize within you what is dark? What is the shadows? What are you capable of? So, when we talk about this idea of the biblical stories and good and evil, I want to talk about the tree of life and the tree of knowledge, ultimately, of good and evil, right? Adam and Eve were in the garden, in paradise, essentially, but they were told not to eat from that tree of knowledge, or they will die. I think that's how it was worded. And what is the representation of this? What is the representation of eating from that tree of knowledge? It's the fact that they became self-conscious to their own vulnerabilities. They became self-conscious to good, to evil within. They were naked. They were vulnerable. And that's scary, because that's all of us. That represents all of us. When we are born into this world, we come in as this little blank baby, right? There's nothing We're a tiny little baby, all the potential in the world within us, and what is our conditioning going to do to us? What situation are we going to be raised in? Are we going to be raised in a house that does bring the best out of us, and we're virtuous, and we're loving, and we're good? Or is our conditioning going to make us commit heinous, evil acts? That is the nature of human experience in the world we are living in. We're all capable of anything based on our conditioning. And I think that's so empowering to recognize that good, that evil that is within, right? I mean, if we continue on with the biblical stories, you have Adam and Eve's kids, right? Cain and Abel. You know, Abel is ultimately this upstanding, everybody loves him, he's virtuous, he's great, he's in God's good favor. And you have Cain, who is the serf, who is I think he's a sheep herder, that's what his sort of title was. And he's very much viewed down upon. And what does he do? He goes and he kills his brother. A heinous act. Heinous act. So right there, you have the literal representation of good and evil. And how does God respond to that killing? Well, he doesn't seek vengeance. Actually, he wants to take Cain under his wing. And that's where this idea of reconciliation, that's where this idea of divinity within all of us, even those who commit heinous acts, actually comes from. I mean, if you look into ancient times, were the peasants and the servants and slaves at the bottom of the socioeconomical hierarchy viewed as divine? Absolutely not. There was nothing that was viewed about divine about them. The same goes with, women in certain class standards in certain societies. And you talk about racism that has existed in certain cultures and the slave trades. And all throughout human history, there is perfect examples of this idea that we are not recognizing the divinity that exists within all of us. And the one great thing about Western civilization that we have been able to build on is that idea that we are all divine. And that's why it's very scary to see some of the discourse, to see some of the complete shunning and eradication talk that is coming from some of these political pundits, right? So we have to ask ourselves, again, with all of this in mind, what is good? What is evil? And ultimately, when it comes back to perception, it all starts by looking inward. What is the good within you? What have you done that is good? What have you done to help others, to be virtuous, to live a good life, to make the world a little bit of a better place? Who have you touched in a good way and brought out the best of others? Recognize that within yourself. But also, this is the part that people don't want to talk about. This is the part that people don't want to look into. What is it that is evil within you? Carl Jung talked about this, and one of his key ideas when we're talking about integrating the shadows here is you should be able to represent in yourself all of the horrors of humanity and ultimately take responsibility for those. Every atrocity that has ever been committed in the history of mankind was done by humans, was done by people like you, like me, like anybody else that you know. It was done by humans, right? I mean, that's why when Jordan Peterson talks about in some of his lectures, and he got a little flack for this before, that if you were born and raised in Nazi Germany under the right conditions, you would have been a Nazi. You could have been the guard working at the concentration camp, right? I mean, I read a great story in preparation for this podcast about there was this monk who was a pacifist, and growing up he protested the Vietnam War, did all these sit-ins, but one of the most powerful transformative experiences he had was he did this retreat it was a meditation retreat, and they did it in Auschwitz. For days they sat in silence in Auschwitz in this, and we all know what happened at Auschwitz, and he said that he was able to see himself as the guards. He was able to see himself committing these horrible acts, and he was able to see himself on the other side as well, and he was able to get that full spectrum, that full shadow that exist within oneself. And, we're so afraid to face the shadow because we don't want to acknowledge that we're capable of horrendous deeds. We don't want to be conscious of that dark side of ourselves, this idea of evil. And because we don't want to be conscious within ourselves, we don't recognize it when it's now out in the world around us. We don't recognize it that when the divisiveness that we're fueling by calling right-wing people terrorists, by calling people who hold a different opinion and live a different life, when we are calling them deplorable, we don't recognize that we are actually fueling the fires of evil with that type of rhetoric, because we are being divisive. We are not recognizing the divine that exists within us, and it's leading to scary places. Why is that? We look at the United States right now. They're talking about a new domestic terrorist law that's going to crack down on hate speech. It's going to crack down on people who spread misinformation. And really, what is that but shunning opinions you don't like because you're afraid of what they might have to say, right? You don't cut off somebody's tongue because they're lying. You cut it off because it's revealing something within yourself that you do not want to face, right? You need to confront the shadow that is within yourself if you at all want to recognize evil that exists in the world, and ultimately the evil that exists within ourselves. A failure to do so ultimately makes you the perpetrator of evil. Why is it that some people in Nazi Germany, Oskar Schindler's List, fantastic movie, why is it that he was able to recognize the horrors of the Nazis and work to save Jews? Because he recognized the divine that exists within all of us. What does the idea of love thy neighbor truly represent, right? There was a LA Times article the other day about somebody who voted for Biden, and it was, obviously this didn't happen in LA because there's no snow in LA, but it was written in an LA Times editorial written by somebody who was mad because their Trump-supporting neighbor shoveled their driveway, and they did a fantastic job of it, and it's how am I supposed to hate them now? And when I saw that, I thought it must have been satire, but no, they are serious. They are holding this hatred within them. You feel the need to hate. And, I keep bringing up the left because I see that side being more caught up in this in terms of the explicit nature, because they are the ones that hold the power. The power structures are enforcing this, but it's the same on the right as well. We all need to recognize the divine that is within us. Ultimately, you cannot be good in this world until you recognize your own evil, until you recognize your own atrocity, and ultimately you can take responsibility for all the atrocities of all of mankind. And, that is a powerful thing to contemplate, right? If you can recognize that evil is committed by humans, you can get a moral grasp on what is good, what is evil, because it is not defined by some law. This is something that is abstract, that is ultimately exists within morals and virtue. And I think this notion of that we are all divine, this idea that we have built Western society on previously, can be a good tool, can be a good pillar to recognize good and evil. I look at the world right now and I see what's going on with lockdowns. I see what's going on with these people in power. I look at what people like Bill Gates are doing, the Great Reset and the depopulation agenda that exists in the world right now. That is happening because people don't understand that evil exists in the world. They go along with it and they support these policies. They support mandated vaccinations. They support the loss of free will, the loss of choice. They don't recognize that people hold different worldviews than their own. And certainly there are only a few worldviews that are going to actually create moral and structured society, but people don't recognize that there is difference of expression within this one unified consciousness. And we need to celebrate those differences of expression and find ways to come together as one, united, in order to move forward. You know, the nature of good and evil, it is all within your perception. And you have to look at the shadows. You have to look inward. And you have to recognize, what is it that I have done in this world that, I could constitute as evil? There are things that we've all done that we certainly could be ashamed of. Maybe we hurt somebody, and maybe we hurt somebody badly. Maybe we traumatized somebody, right? Or maybe, we did things that we're just not proud of, right? How can you move forward with that and not hold shame, not hold grief for yourself, and use that to fuel a life that is moral, that is virtuous, that is for the greater good? How can you celebrate unique expression? How can you celebrate diversity in the singular unified field of consciousness of all that is, right? So, like I said, if you're not going to look inward at your own shadow, if you're not going to recognize that evil exists and it is manifesting, the more we fuel into this divisiveness, the more we fuel into the divide, the more this is going to manifest. If you're not willing to face that, you are perpetrating it directly, right? And if we're looking at what is sort of the future here, if we don't confront this, starting on an individual level, it all starts with you, it all starts with me, and continually confront this, we are potentially headed for some very dark days. I feel this notion that we are all divine is one that is on the outs, because this atheistic, nihilistic worldview is one that's taking off because we're so obsessed with materialism, because we're defining ourselves by basic status, such as our name, race, sex. The race card is played out all over the world because they don't want to recognize the oneness that is in all of us. Doesn't matter if you're black, white, Asian, Hispanic, blue, yellow, orange. It's all the same. The same with the LGBTQ community, right? Celebrate your unique expression, celebrate your sexuality and who it is that you want to be, but recognize that we're all one. We don't need feminist groups fighting transgender groups and vice versa, and this divide and that divide, because ultimately we're creating more hatred, we're creating more fuel and giving control to the people who want to control and want to manipulate these power structures that are existent right now. While Western society has been, we've lived in this power structure, and it's given us the idea that we are all divine. One of the very first power structures to do that, and we can be blessed for that. We can feel gratitude for what we have learned and what we have been able to accomplish as a civilization, because we are in the most prosperous time in human history. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of abundance. More people are middle class than there are people who are in poverty. And that in itself is an accomplishment. That's something we should be proud of, because for much of human history, most people were in poverty. So we can recognize the good, but we also have to recognize what direction we're going in when we lose touch with the fact that we are all divine, and we all have worth, and we all have good that is within us, right? So moving forward, you have a choice. Don't think that your choices don't matter. Every single choice that you make from here on out has a consequence. Has a consequence on you, it has a consequence on the people around you, has a consequence on your community, and in turn has a consequence on the whole world. So, are you going to confront the evil? Are you going to look inward, go on this hero's journey, see the dragon, the beast, the monster that lives within, and are you going to confront that, or are you going to repress it and let it control you subconsciously? And if you let it control you subconsciously, you cannot act morally, because you don't know what morals are, because you don't have that recognition of good and evil on the total scale of things, right? So recognizing that evil within allows you to stay calm and steady during times of conflict, right? During times where life is throwing turmoil at you. Because that's life, man. Life is innately suffering in a lot of ways, right? The wheel of fortune is always in motion. It's always spinning. It's got its eyes cast upon you. And life can be flipped upside down in a moment, at any time. And so when you can stay calm in who you are and recognize the divine worth that it is and the power that your choices hold, you can act from a place of morals. You can act from a place of virtue. And not, virtue is thrown around a lot. And we have a lot of people virtue signaling who want to be virtuous and think they're doing the right thing, in particular social justice warriors. But they're not, because they don't recognize the potential consequences that their choices may have on others. They don't recognize the evil that is within. And that's not all social justice warriors by any means, but I see it a lot manifesting. And, you really have to go into the shadow realm. You have to look into the dreams, the dark visions, the anguish that can exist within, right? And, don't shy away from them. Don't repress them any further. Go into this creative landscape. Pick up a hobby that's creative. Start writing. Start journaling these feelings, these traits that exist within you. Start really taking note on who it is that you are and the feelings that you have. And don't repress them. Acknowledge that they're valid. Acknowledge that they're human and that you are human. And, it can really change your perception when you do this. And at first, it can feel like your whole world is flipped upside down, like I was saying. And you can feel powerless when you recognize the evil that you are capable of. But that's just your perception. Powerlessness, it's a myth. When you can recognize the evil that's within and the good that is on the other end of that spectrum, to know true evil is to know true light. If you can recognize that within, you hold true power. Most people do not hold true power because they do not recognize this aspect within themselves, right? So seek out teachers, seek out mentors, seek out people who can assist you on this journey. And ultimately, we are all one. We are all going through this together. We're all going through this journey of life. Certainly everybody's journey of life is unique in its expression and in its experiences, but these common archetypes that we see laid out in stories such as the biblical stories and the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, these common archetypes they're relatable for everybody because we all go through trials and tribulations. We all go through these vulnerabilities, these awakenings. So you can help others as others can help you. And again, recognize the power of your choices and the karma that exists within that and the true power that you can hold, because we can right the ship. We can right the ship. I truly believe we are at a time where more light is shining down on the planet than ever before. That's why so much darkness is manifesting in the clear eye. 2020 was the year of perfect vision. It was the year that darkness came to light. And that light is going to continue to shine, but it starts, if you want to be part of the light, if you want to be part of the good in the world, you have to recognize the evil that exists within and what you are capable of as a human being. What you are capable of just by existing, by being self-aware, by being self-conscious, right? So it's vital right now. We're at a time, it's more divisive than I've ever seen. And, there's some very scary genocidal rhetoric floating in the mainstream if you choose to open your eyes to it and you choose to recognize what's going on. So I'm going to leave it at that. If you're a fan of the show, like I said, be sure to give us a subscription, a rating, whatever platform you're on. If you're on YouTube, press that like button. And check out my new book, Story of Interconnectivity. It's available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Lulu. Time to realign with who it is that you really are. Head on over to evanmcdermott.org. Sign up for my mailing list. Check out some of the programs we got going on here. And, connect with us on social media. At Evan McDermott, at the Fifth Dimension Podcast. I look forward to chatting with all you guys. I love connecting. I love the community that's being built on this, because I feel that we are moving as one to home, to the light, to the love. And that's a good feeling. That's a good feeling. So that's going to wrap up this episode. Be sure to subscribe, because we got some great interviews, great podcasts planned out. And I'm looking forward to getting them out to you. I'll see you next time.